The parable of the 11th hour vineyard workers is a parable with multiple shades and numerous meanings. Though the parable is called the parable of the vineyard workers, the central character is really the landowner. The workers were hired at different times during the day by the landowner to work in his vineyard. Some worked more hours, some worked lesser hours. The real bombshell came when those who worked for the last 1 hour were paid the same wages as those who toiled all day long. Those who worked long hours protested and grumbled against the landowner for his blatant injustice. It's not fair. We have worked more than those who came in at the last minute. Surely we deserve more than we received. And surely those who worked less deserve lesser than what they received from the landowner. Human resource management, the HR people would say that the wage payment policy of the landowner was seriously flawed. And labor union activists would sue the landowner for disproportionate distribution of wages. The parable of the vineyard workers is an instance of how the thoughts and the ways of God are so very different from our human thoughts and human ways. The parable speaks of the generosity of God. God's gifts are not influenced by our efforts, nor restricted to our merit. Most of God's gifts to us are free. The best ones are absolutely free. Our earthly minds respect fair play and hard work. God rewards our endeavors, but His generosity goes beyond justice. God gives us more than what is due, more than what we really deserve. In a sense, this parable presents the whole of the gospel in a nutshell. This is a wonderful story about God's graciousness and compassion and justice, and above all, a story of God's unconditional love. God is generous, compassionate, and forgiving, not small-minded, calculative, and vindictive like we sometimes are in our day-to-day life. It is jokingly said that the parable of the 11th hour workers is for latecomers and for slow movers. And so it is open to possible misinterpretation and misunderstanding, as it apparently insults the hard worker. God seems to be unfair and unjust, as God is seen to favor the idler at the expense of the hard worker. We could conclude, why slog and work hard if at the end we are all going to receive the same remuneration and the same reward? Jim and John, two friends and real estate brokers, both invested in properties. Jim invested 1 lakh and John invested 5 lakhs in different properties in the same society. 3 years later, Jim found a buyer and sold his property costing 1 lakh for 10 lakhs. John also found a buyer and sold his property costing 5 lakhs for 10 lakhs. Both made decent profits from their investments. John got back twice the amount, 10 for 5. Jim was luckier and got back 10 times his investment, 10 for 1. How do you think John must have reacted when he learned that his friend Jim got back 10 times the investment, whereas he got back only twice the investment? Like many of us would have felt, John also cursed his luck. He was jealous. He started feeling cheated, and he criticized, blamed, and highlighted the defects of his friend Jim. How do we respond when people who work less than us move ahead of us in life? How do we respond when people who put in lesser effort become more popular than us? How do we respond when people with lesser talents are appreciated more than us? How do we respond when people economically behind us start earning more than us? In short, how do we react and respond to the progress and success of others? Let us face reality. Few of us are untouched and unaffected by envy. When envy gets hold of us, we become spiritually blind. We fail to appreciate our own riches and our own blessings. Envy is different and more dangerous than jealousy. Jealousy makes me focus on what others have and I do not have. Envy makes me focus on what others have and I too have. Envy is when a successful person grudges the progress and success of others. Envy proposes a philosophy of destruction. It does not want others to reach their full potential. Envy thrives on the misery of others. In the parable, there is an implicit comparison between the Gentiles and the Jews. Jews at the time of Jesus had a sense of superiority. They assumed that God worked on a merit system. They believed that one could earn graces by hard work and by sticking to the law. The 11th hour workers at the time of Jesus were the Gentiles and sinners, the tax collectors and the prostitutes, the lepers and the outcasts. Jesus through the parable declares, God is full of compassion for the poor and the outcasts. God does not work on a commission system at all. God's generosity extends to everybody, and very specially to the rejects, the despised and the marginalized. The parable therefore is not about God's justice. It is about God's generosity. The landowner goes out at 5 different times and hires 5 different groups of workers. Interestingly, the landowner makes a contract only with the first group of workers. The second group receives a promise, not a contract. The second, third, and fourth group of workers are ready to work with less specific assurance. The last group gets no assurance, no promise at all, yet they readily go to work. This last group, the 11th hour laborers, were not loafers. They genuinely wanted to work. They waited in the marketplace till late in the evening. These were the lowest class of workers, the leftovers, the rejects, the despised and the marginalized. Those who were called at the last moment joyfully answered the call of the landowner. There are so many people who would be like the 11th hour worker, lonely and discouraged, victims of media trials, the ones whom society leaves out because of their lack of achievement and success, lack of good looks, lack of extraordinary talents and poor manners. The gospel also tells us that those who got no assurance went home happily. The first group roamed around unhappily, grumbling and fault finding. We may ask, what made them unhappy? What made them grumble? What made them negative? What made them so dissatisfied? The parable says that they were not unhappy for what they got, but because for what they did not get. They resented others getting as much as they got. Jesus warns us of the dangers of resentment and envy. Honest introspection will reveal that we are not free from resentful tendencies and the destructive power of envy. We encounter the 11th hour workers and contract workers every day in our lives. Do I see reflected in some of the workers who complained my own envy, my own selfishness, and my own greed? Am I able to rejoice with others when I see that God has been good to them as well? Do I always want everything for myself and not for others, especially for those whom I don't have a liking, or for those who think differently from me, or those who have an opinion contrary to mine? Do we have double standards for judging others and ourselves? When others fail, we demand justice. When we falter and fail, we excuse our fault as human error. There are times when we fall into the vicious and malicious temptation of spreading gossip with the goal of destroying others, particularly their integrity and hard-earned reputation. At the Eucharist, let us ask God to bless us and help us to appreciate the many blessings that we receive, and to free us from all negativity and envy in our lives. Let us be particularly conscious and sensitive to the presence and the needs of the leftovers, the rejects, the despised, the poor, and the marginalized around us, and make a concerted effort to have them experience God through our tiny acts of love, compassion, and generosity. Amen.
यीशु बुलाता है, हमें वो प्यार सिखाता है। यीशु बुलाता है, हमें वो प्यार सिखाता है।
उसने अपना जीवन देकर हमको दिया है जीवन दान। यीशु ही सत्य है, वही है मार्ग।